So, Geoff, first off, thanks for hanging out with us. Full Race, your company, like I have this vivid picture of what Full Race was for me in that early 2000s era where like when the Evos were really starting to take the scene. I was a DSM guy. I know that people here are probably sick of hearing that, but so as we went through it, it's like, the big builds, the really, really big power builds, the ones that were on all the covers of the magazines, the ones that, you would lust over because it was just too unobtainable for you to build that level of car. Or if you went to the drag strip and some of the really fast guys that had really great parts, they had those Full Race manifolds, and how much of candy they were. I mean, just beautiful welds and all that whole thing. How did you even get started? Like, where was the start that brings you to Full Race?
So kind of just to put the beginning on this whole circle, I'll come full circle, is the first thing I ever bought was actually a set of Koenig villains.
Get out.
I was like 1997.
Okay.
And I was working at a bike shop, and all I wanted was this set of 5-spoke Koenig villains. And so like I sold this. Yeah, it's crazy. I remember when Troy asked me, I was like, dude, I'd love to go on this, because that's really how it began. I was at a high school called High Technology High School. And I was very fortunate. It was like a high school for kids who were going to be engineering students. And I just lucked out. I ended up at this high school, real small, and a kid there had I think it was an import tuner magazine.
Yeah. It
was like a turbo, it was a turbo Civic with an Integra. And I'm like, that doesn't even make sense. An Acura engine and a Honda with a turbo. And then my aunt, I bought a Prelude off her with a broken timing belt, so I had to fix all the valves. And my buddy's dad was a Honda mechanic, so I figured out you could fix bend valves and put a new timing chain and make this Prelude work. So I did that, sold it, started hanging out at Englishtown, right? So I'm from New Jersey. You guys are in Long Island.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, so I spent way too many hours, like every Wednesday test and tune, Friday test and tune, Saturday, Sunday events. I was just going to E-Town. Spent a lot of time on the drag strip, and my friends started breaking turbo manifolds.
Yeah.
And so I went to Arizona State University. I was living in Philly, going to college there for a little while, and I got a little bit too into street racing.
Right.
Lost my license for a little while, and my friend's like, hey, you should come to Arizona. There's no potholes, and it's warm. I visited him. I left the school I was going to Philly, and I enrolled at Arizona State Engineering School. And so one thing led to another. I put some pictures of a turbo manifold I was making online, and I had people from Australia and Japan, Europe, just like, how much? And then I started having people fly over with stacks of cash, and I'm 21 years old. I had no business running a business. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. And so we just started going all in on making the most beautiful turbo manifolds. It became a passion and an art. And really, above all, is our stuff wouldn't crack. And so it's just, aside from the design aspect, when a turbo manifold cracks, you lose 80, 100 plus horsepower and more on a race car. So that just became the thing. If guys were racing, they didn't want to deal with broken turbo manifolds. And so we solved that, and we did it in a beautiful way. And then we invested in robotic welding. And so what happened was we just kept ratcheting it up, but I was running off of a passion, and I loved what I did. The problem was I was trying to turn it into a business.
Yeah.
And that's very difficult to do when you're high labor in the United States, using expensive materials and selling it to a customer base who's, the turbo manifold's actually worth more than the Honda Civic or the 240 or the DSM that it was going on. So, and I was actually really grateful, like, just to look back, I'm really grateful for the people who supported us and believed in our vision. And like for 20 years, that's kind of what our model was just building the most beautiful turbo manifolds we possibly could.
Right.
And so that was kind of the beginning of it, but I don't want to jump to the end of the story. So
yeah, no, for sure. No, I mean, like, listen, it's kind of, it's interesting for me because one of my big passions besides, I mean, I like building cars, but as I get older, obviously, and have kids and all that stuff, you lose the time. But one of the things that I still really love to do, and my friends take advantage of me all the time, is I like to fabricate, right? Like I love to weld, and I love to do all these things. So I think that, having that skill set is a real huge advantage, because it changes the pace at which you can move to build your own stuff, right? You don't have that interruption of dropping something off or whatever it is. And so seeing some of these manifolds, maybe before I was really any good at welding, or seeing some of these things become in a bolt-on ready fashion, that was really that time period where you were kind of getting started. That was really the big start of that bolt-on type era, right? So you guys started doing that, and then you kind of eventually pushed into like selling actual turbo kits, right? Like putting
Yeah,
everything
exactly.
together.
Well, at the time too, it's hard to get turbos. You couldn't get a turbo from Summit.
Right.
Like there's only so many places that you could get turbos from. And on top of it, there's only so many people who even knew what turbo to use or the specs. So it became a natural extension for us to start selling the right turbo that suits the manifold.
Right.
And then, it was only a matter of time until the guys who were making the turbos, the Borg Warners and the Garretts and MHI, started coming to us and saying, what are your customers buying? Where's the demand? And how can we fit into that? And so we just, that was back in 2004, 5, 6. We started working with Borg Warner. Then all these other major players would come to us. And I think over time, we kind of influenced what became released to some extent.
Right. So one of the things that I always think about, and maybe, listen, I think a lot of people that maybe are even into buying and changing the turbos out now is that they hear Borg Warner and they may be under this illusion that this is a fairly small company that makes aftermarket turbos. But Borg Warner is a massive, massive company that, if you go on and they, like if you look at most bus turbos for a million years have been, doing this type of thing. When they come to you and they say, hey, Geoff, we need some help here. We want to develop something. We want to make sure that we're working within the parameters that your customers want and what kind of needs do they have. Is that, are they looking at it, recognizing it's a smaller scale for them, or are they like really excited about jumping into kind of a demographic and thinking that there's a lot of, flourishment available?
So just to get back to the first point you made.
Yeah.
Borg Warner, Garrett, MHI.
Yeah.
These companies, I think Borg Warner makes 14 million turbos a year. Garrett
right.
makes
just
15 million turbos a year.
Just a few.
A lot of people ask us, why doesn't Full Race have their own turbo?
Right.
And we probably could. I've had opportunities to create our own turbos. But the reality is I've visited these production facilities. And when you see how a tier one, and that's what these guys are, they're tier one OEM supplier, how they make a turbocharger, it's remarkable. Everything's robotic. Everything's measured with lasers. And the infrastructure required to do that is not in the millions. Like that's hundreds of millions of dollars, maybe billions to really do that well.
Yeah. And
so I understand how much that they put into the process. And I can't even come to holding a candle to that. So why would I even want to throw my hat in the ring? What I want to do is I want to partner with these guys and, utilize their facilities and team and PhD aerodynamicists to try and make the biggest, smartest move that we possibly can, because time's limited, right? Time is really the asset. So what can you do in the shortest amount of time? So then when it comes to what is a company asking for or looking for, each company is different and really different. Garrett is making a variety of motorsports turbos just for Le Mans, 24 hours Le Mans or Daytona. Those are the TR series. And then they make the consumer enthusiast level high performance turbo. That's the G series. And then they make a journal bearing, right? That's the GBs. They cover the whole ground. And then they have bolt-on plug and play power. Yep. So Garrett's the 800-pound gorilla. Make no question about it, right? Borg Warner is into it for IndyCar. At the end of the day, the Borg Warner performance thing would barely even exist if it weren't for IndyCar. And so the fact that IndyCar even exists and was funded by Borg Warner is the reason that we all got this trickle down thing from that. But I'll tell you, I have no question about it. Like if it weren't for IndyCar, Borg Warner would probably not be a player in our market.
That's crazy. I don't think I ever would have put the correlation together without hearing that.
Yeah. So I love the Borg Warner turbos, but that was the truth. Yeah.
So Geoff, out of curiosity, is that where that EFR technology came from on the turbos as well? Is that all for like packaging in the IndyCar series, or is that something that they just came up with on their own? I have a feeling.
So I was very fortunate. I was there from day one with EFR, and I really loved the turbos. And the truth is, they were 100%. That project almost got scrapped so many times, and the only thing that forced it to move on and become a thing that we now know was the IndyCar contracts.
Really?
Okay.
Yeah. And so I probably shouldn't speak too much out of turn. I mean, that's the honest truth. And I remember going through a lot of headaches and heartaches and just finding out the reality was that IndyCar's running the show, guys. So you're on the other side. You're going to get what you get, but IndyCar is our focus. Now, on another case in point, MHI, that's Mitsubishi Heavy Industries.
Yeah.
They make BMWs, turbos. They make almost all the electronic wastegate actuators in Ford, Porsche, Honda, turbo. Like, it's wild how big MHI is. They came to us in like 15, and I told them, listen, I don't think you even want to try and compete with Garrett's G Series or Borg Warner's EFRs. This universal turbo thing is locked up. You got Precision, all these other players.
Yeah.
You're not going to win doing that. If MHI wants to make a move, how about we take the turbo that you're already making for Honda's Civic Type R, and we'll put state-of-the-art aerodynamics in it. Make it a plug-and-play turbo that can gain another 150 plus horsepower. And, you know, that kind of formula has worked really well for MHI. We sell quite a few of those turbos, and they fit Accords and all these Honda SUVs. It's really wild. So I think every company has its own different formula, and to stray from that formula would not be wise.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Sorry, I was going to say, so is it safe to say that you single-handedly convinced Mitsubishi to do big wheel stock turbos? Is that what I'm hearing?
Not single-handedly, but the big boss came over from Japan. He sat down in my office in Arizona, and I said, can we just start with Civic Type R? And so that was step one, and it was a home run.
Yeah.
There have been a few other turbos that they did before my involvement, which was like the Evo 10, Evo 8.9.
Yeah.
So Evo 10 came first. That was the TF06. Then Evo 8.9 came after. Phenomenal turbos, like unbelievable. In fact, I love Evos. Talk about DSMs. My wife was a DSM person. That's how I met her, oddly enough. And like, I love those cars. But, you know, the reality is if you could do a bolt-on plug-and-play turbo that'll do 550 in that thing, that's the limit of your tranny anyway. You know, it's like done. And it's simple. If you wanted it to bolt to the stock cat or whatever mods you have, it's just so easy versus a $6,000-$7,000 tear-up turbo kit of an EFR and wastegates and all this stuff. So really, I guess jumping forward to the big shift that I saw was people stopped wanting to fabricate.
Yeah.
Right. You just talked about how much you like it and how it's fun. Well, most people don't like that anymore. And most people don't want to own a TIG welder or a bandsaws or whatever. So I feel like the application specific stuff really took the front seat.
Yeah. There's no doubt that there's definitely a good shift that probably came, like, you know, in the, I don't want to say mid, but like in that 2008, 2009, 2010 window where you started to see more companies really double down on going from, you know, stuff that required different manifolds to being able to have bolt-on stock locations, stock housing type bolt-on situations that would give you a much better, you know, center, you know, piece, to give you the wheels, to give you some of the ability to kind of make a lot more power with the stock location type fit. Does that, so you feel that was like, that was something you guys really followed along with, right? Was trying to pair some of the stuff?
What we did is we've just looked at our sales, and the Evo was a great example, right? Because we made this Evo kit for the hardcore Borg Warner, whatever, and the Garrett this, and then we made an Evo turbo manifold that fit the stock turbo.
Yeah.
And we sold 30 to 1 of that to the other. And
well, there's a lot more stock Evos than there are highly modified Evos.
That's right. And so my passion and my obsession as an engineer was this highly modified Evo thing. But as a business person, I'm like, dude, we're doing this all wrong.
Yeah.
You know?
Right. Yeah, it's crazy because it's like, you know, just by you making that statement, it kind of starts to lay the groundwork in my mind without having the knowledge base about kind of maybe some of the direction that the company took, right? Like I look at, I know we're jumping around a little bit. Let's flash forward a little bit to now. You guys really became a strong player within the EcoBoost Ford, you know, type area, right? And I would imagine that a lot of that thought you just put in kind of laid that groundwork, right?
Yeah, it laid the foundation, absolutely. And so what I think really changed all this was that Borg Warner, starting to work with Borg Warner in 05, 06. We started laying the groundwork for like EFRs in 07, 08.
Yeah.
And then at the time, behind the scenes, Ford started experimenting with the V8 F-150 engine, and they put twin turbos. They put a sheet metal intake manifold. They put these twin turbos, and they actually ran the fuel injection system from a Porsche Cayenne because it was able to be plug and play, and Bosch hooked Ford up. So they all developed. Yeah, long story short, Borg Warner says, hey, Ford's going to turn every V8 into a V6 with turbos. Every V6 will become a 4-cylinder with turbos, and every 4-cylinder will become a 3-cylinder with a turbo. And they want you to prototype these turbo kits. And we're like, yeah, we're in. And that really kind of laid the groundwork. I didn't really ever anticipate that Full Race would be a pickup truck company, especially coming from the East Coast where pickup trucks just aren't that common. But I've always had a soft spot for desert trucks. I remember the old Ivan Stewart like Nintendo game, and like the vision of this long travel Toyota was just so sick in my mind. And so once Ford says we're going to do this F-150 and it's going to have 2 turbos, I was like, that's kind of cool. And I'm in Phoenix. Yeah. There's desert trucks everywhere. And I was building a Toyota pre-runner at the time. So I was getting into the desert thing a little bit. And I was like, all right, well, let's do it. And so we dabbled. And like, you release a couple parts for an F-150 EcoBoost in 2011, and nobody even knew what an EcoBoost was, or that you could get turbos on a pickup. That meant nothing to anyone. So we didn't really sell anything in 2011 for these. We're like, it might have been a waste of time. In 2012, we sold a couple intercoolers. And so we were the first people to put a big intercooler in the grill of an F-150.
Right.
You do that to fit a winch, fit a snow plow, fit a pre-runner bumper, whatever. So a couple people bought them, but not really. But then Ford engineer, I was talking to him at SEMA. He says, there's a good chance that motor's going to end up in a Ford Raptor. I was like, oh. He's like, the Ford Raptor is really cool. So I registered for this Ford Raptor for him. This is like June of 2012, I think it was. Right. I finally registered for the Ford. And, time goes on. And 2015, they rolled out the aluminum body to F-150. Right. It saved 700 pounds in the cabin. In 2017, they rolled out the Raptor, which had the 10-speed tranny and port injection and dual injection and bigger turbos, the electric action. And I was like, okay, this is game on. So around that time, too, EPA started dropping down on some people, and they sort of forced the hand where you got to step away from the turbo kits and go into the plug and play. So this 30-to-1 Evo thing started becoming more and more of our business. And then Ford really stepped it up, man. What I think happened between 2017 and 2020 was that they released the Generation 2 Raptor, and that was another step above what we've seen. And I think a lot of people, especially in this world, probably don't actually realize what Ford just did, but the 17 to 20 Raptors are incredible, and there are a lot of them out there. They've depreciated a ton. I kind of feel like that's the new 240, Evo, STI, whatever platform of the truck world.
Right.
And then in 2021, Ford revamped the Raptor for the Gen 3, and that's when they got it all right. And so like a 21, 22 Raptor to me is peak truck. They got the motor right, the tranny right, suspension right, everything right. The ECUs can be unlocked, and that's I guess another conversation, but it's a really interesting thing. So I'm kind of all in on that platform.
But you guys do other, like, besides just the Raptors, I mean, you also make other parts, other manifolds, other kits for some of the other EcoBoost engines, because like you said, they kind of went through their paces and kind of started to EcoBoost a lot of their line to be able to get that power.
Really, manifolds aren't a thing anymore, right? They are to an extent, but they're not tubular, because there's actually no way to put a tubular manifold on any of these EcoBoost engines. We've tried and we've done it, but it isn't pretty.
Yeah.
And really, the cylinder heads are either integrated so that the exhaust manifold is built into the cylinder head and the turbo bolts right to it, like in the case of the Mustang, the Broncos, Explorer STs, or it has a cast. And we made a more thoughtful cast manifold, but it's a cast turbo manifold in the case of the Raptors and the 3.5 liters.
Just before we move on, I actually want to touch on that, because I was going to actually ask you about the integrated manifolds into the head and what you're seeing as far as flow characteristics, and are those performing better, or are you seeing disadvantages, advantages? Like, just kind of want to pick your brain on that, because it's such a new technology that's kind of being seen more and more. Just, wanted your input on it.
Yeah, so integrated exhaust manifold is very polarizing. From a guy like me who built long runner exotic headers for a long time, it hurt my heart. And I get why enthusiasts are like, oh no, stay away. But the reality is some of these things work really well, like way better than I ever anticipated. Civic Type R is a great example. That thing is a little monster, and it looks like it should never flow well, but it does really well. The Mustang and Focus RS heads, they're twin scroll, they work pretty well. And the issue comes in when you're trying to make 800,000-900,000 horsepower through an integrated. So it is possible. I've seen guys make 800 through a Civic Type R head, but it's not going to do the silly horsepower like a standard port manifold.
Because you're limited to the head. Like it's only as good as the flow characteristics of the head. There's only so far you can go with the head. At that point, you'd have to kind of.
I mean, are you able to go in and port it like you would like a traditional head to an extent where you can?
Yeah, to an extent. Okay. Absolutely. Now, the reality is, though, direct injection changes everything.
Yeah, 100%.
And people don't really understand that how the fuel gets in the cylinder is way more important than how the exhaust gets out. And it's important how the exhaust gets out, absolutely. But DI changes the game. And at this point, I would rather have no exhaust manifold. Like, Full Race, we've built these things for 2 decades. We're some of the best in the world at what we did. And I'm just like, I'd rather do away with all of that because you don't need it.
Okay.
Yeah, it's wild. It's certainly. Do you see any other thing? You know, it's. You talked about how, you know, you saw or you had some insight maybe to how popular or what Ford's intentions were with the EcoBoost platforms and what would happen with their engines and adding turbocharging into kind of more of their mainstay of cars. But do you see anything that maybe today is coming down the pike? That is going to continuously change maybe some of the traditional tuning that we've seen besides just regular, EPA computer type things?
So the reality is emissions drives everything.
Yeah.
The reason we have turbos, DI plus port, 10-speed transmissions, all aluminum cabs, all this stuff is just fuel economy mandates. So what's happening right now is very uncertain. I don't know how this is going to age, but Trump takes away this EV thing, and now it's a battle in court. Who knows what's going to happen? Automakers don't know what's going to happen.
Right.
The reality was, though, this EV push is real, and automakers are probably going to adopt EVs because there's less parts. It's as simple as that. You need
cheaper to build.
It's cheaper to build. That's it. And this is something that's been accelerated by regulation. And I'll tell you what, the rumors from people who I know that know their stuff have said, Geoff, there's these EcoBoost Mustang 4-cylinder engines that were developed with twin charging, triple charging, electric e-boosters, superchargers, and twin scroll turbos.
Oh my God.
And that exists, but all that tech was basically scrapped because what's the point? We're just going all EV anyway. And so it sounds like a lot of very talented engineers have been laid off in the last little while. So the technology has existed to really bring combustion to the next level. And it remains to be seen what happens next.
So it's interesting. It's like, I don't want to get everything, and I want to preface this, but everything I say from this point forward is not political. It's just factual, right? Like, we see a guy like Lee Zeldin come on as the head of the EPA. They immediately reversed the EV mandate. I think I've been pretty vocal about my opposition to the EV mandate, but it's not because I have an opposition to EVs, right? Like, I don't. I think that they're a good supplemental piece of, kind of the powertrains and different things.
They fill a niche for the guy that has to go from, say, the office to his job that's a couple miles away. He plugs it in when he gets home at night. It's perfect for that. But if you're traveling those long distances or you need something that I just don't see it
yet. I just they were rushing something to market that the infrastructure wasn't there for, right?
Exactly.
Like, we weren't there until battery technology gets way better and until they came up with this infrastructure to be able to actually make it so that you can just pull in almost anywhere and there wasn't that fear of getting stranded. It was just happening too fast, and that was more of my critical nature to it. But like, going back to this whole EPA change, like you said, we got all these changes that are happening. I've heard people talk about the fact that no, the next push could be a hydrogen combustion engine and some of these other things. Have you heard any more of that stuff? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, hydrogen is definitely interesting. You can combust it. You need a gigantic tank, so it really is only suitable to trucks, maybe pickup trucks or something that has this room for a giant tank. And it requires, so that's an e-boosting trick, right? You need e-turbo trick, excuse me.
Right.
It takes a lot of energy to really get the energy of the hydrogen to really work, but there are prototypes. There's no question about it that there's potential there. I think it's probably going to be a little while. Containing hydrogen, working with hydrogen requires different materials. I believe hydrogen can actually seep through a stainless steel tube, right? The moleculars, it's pretty weird what you have to do with hydrogen. So I am not a hydrogen expert, but reality is if you're going to use hydrogen, it's actually better used as a fuel cell to power an EV motor.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
Toyota was doing the hydrogen fuel cell for a very long time. I mean,
the problem with hydrogen is
energy into it.
You need nuclear power to generate hydrogen cost effectively.
Which is no problem. We can easily put nuclear reactors in every vehicle. it shouldn't really be a problem. We did it with
Fallout?
subs, so we'll just go ahead and
Fallout? Do
No,
you
don't
ever
need-
play
you don't need
Fallout?
Fallout.
Cars
You'll-
just blow up.
It'd be easier to figure out where cars have accidents because there'll be a mushroom plume that will.
Yeah, exactly. Just lead them right there.
And you know, so there's also belief that the exhaust coming out of a modern 2024, 2025's car is actually cleaner than the surrounding air in terms of particulates. So I have a friend of mine, Greg Banish. He's an expert calibrator for Ford. He's worked for GM, Dodge.
Right.
Senior calibrator. So he has a team of calibrators working under him. And he often talks about how clean that exhaust actually has to be at this point. It's getting crazy how clean it has to be. So yeah, a modern car is pretty clean. And the cats are pretty efficient. You know, the power levels that these cars are now making off the factory floor and blowing clean, it's pretty remarkable. And so I feel like there has been a reticent willingness to accept that cats work well, and that you probably should have a cat in your car in this day and age.
Right.
You know, I really do think that the times have changed, and people who are running deleted vehicles should, especially on a daily driven street car, you know, it's one thing on a race car.
Yeah.
But like drag and drive guys who are putting a lot of street time on a drag car, I think you really need to consider putting a cat on.
Yeah.
No.
It's interesting. So with a lot of the things that you're offering today, where do you see, I mean, we obviously know the Raptor, you kind of spoke about it, but where do you see a lot of the focus being from Full Race as a company?
So our core at the end of it is we deliver innovation for turbos. Like that's our thing, and it's been that way for a long time. And so
Right.
where we'll continue doing is like Too Short says, get in where you fit in, you know. And it's I take the EcoBoost V6 wrap pretty seriously right now. So there's Gen 1, Gen 2, Gen 3. There's a whole lot of motors just right there in F-150. But Bronco, that's a 2.7 in the V6 Bronco, or a 3-liter in the Bronco Raptor, which is like the Police Interceptor motor.
Yeah.
Same motors in the Ranger V6 and Ranger Raptor. So I'm really excited for those things. They've got an iron block. We've been working on them a lot. We have a turbo kit that'll be coming out in just a couple of months.
Right.
So I feel like that platform is phenomenal. And there's guys making a lot of power on these things. You can swap the like 10R80, the bigger tranny from the F-150. So, you know, the puzzle pieces and swapping and mixing and matching is really there with the Ford platform. So I'm a big believer in that.
Is the 3.0 that's in those the same as the one that's, so I have an ST at home. That's the family car, is the Explorer ST. And is that all the same platform? Is that something that you're also going to be developing for?
So the Explorer ST would be the Nano 3-liter generation one.
Okay.
What the Raptor and then Ranger Raptor are is the 3-liter Nano generation 2. So they're very similar, but slightly different.
Okay. Are you going to be developing products possibly for that ST, or is that going to be something
that we haven't dove into the ST. It's not to say it's impossible. I know that there's a lot of guys who love them and who are modding them. You know, at the moment we're really just working on the trucks.
Okay.
It's a TBD if we'll get into the ST.
Yeah. I think it's interesting though, because like the one thing I think that's when you start looking at that whole EcoBoost thing, and I hate to pick on Explorers because it's like whatever, but when you start thinking about it, there's so many Police Interceptor Explorers now that are available on the market for dirt, right? And so if that is a platform that really starts to pick up, I mean, you know, I've seen a few of those. I mean, don't get me wrong, they're higher mileage, and I don't know how those engines end up aging with some of this stuff, but I mean, there's some of these trucks, you know, 110,000 miles that are selling for $6,500, you know, because they were police cars. And I'm thinking to myself, well, hold on one second. So if we got some parts here, you know, there's some guys that are, you know, have the, you know, newer Explorer STs that they're putting, you know, 500-600 horsepower down. That's pretty impressive for an SUV.
Yeah, it's a terrible race car. It's just a lot of fun.
Well, it's a brick.
Yeah, exactly. It's a lot of fun as a side project. We just kind of make something. Smile.
Yeah, it's interesting. So you talked about how, you know, you guys obviously the need for manifolds and kind of you know, kind of the eye candy manifolds that we were once used to has gone away, but there still is that need for some cars, like you said, even the Raptor, to have those more cast manifolds. Do you guys do that manifold development all in-house? Is that people that you partner with to kind of use shared resources?
Yeah, so we have excellent engineer who works for us, Matt, and that was his baby, and it continues to be his baby, right? We just keep developing cast models, and really 3D printing has come a long way. So being able to validate a part, 3D printing, and test fit it, and then go through the experience of installing it, because you can make the most beautiful part in CAD and you can 3D print this, until you actually put it on an engine and see what it's like. Does a wrench fit?
Yeah.
You know, can I tighten this thing, or am I going to, you know, make it impossible? And those little tweaks and time spent are the only way to really vet a product before, you know, knowing that it's good to go.
Yeah, but developing cast manifolds is an entire different animal from doing something where you're, you know, fabricating a tubular manifold.
Yeah, it's high stakes because you have to pay for a mold.
Yeah,
Simple as that. And you mess up, you're paying for that mold twice.
Yeah,
and they are not cheap. It's scary. So I feel like that's the higher stakes, right? If you want to play at that level, you got to get it right the first time, and it is not easy. We've gotten it wrong, and we've had to retool. Yeah, that's a tough lesson.
Yeah, I would imagine we have that same casting type thing that happens on the wheel side, and you know, if we're not doing forged wheels, you know, we're developing molds, and there's sometimes that, you know, you feel that you're onto something. I will say that the one thing that the 3D printing has given us is that taken away some of the shock and awe. It used to be every year we would get to SEMA, and that was the first time we'd ever seen a wheel that we had made. You know, we've been working on it since April, and you know, you make it, you do this whole thing, you feel good with it with renderings and 3Ds, and then you move into, you know, getting these molds made, and by the time you get them, you're like right at SEMA. It's always the button. I don't know. We all know it's coming every year, and somehow we still manage to have to air freight every single thing in for samples. But so we get these wheels, and then, you know, it's like your first time. You open the box, and you're praying that it's like it doesn't look, and sometimes you're like, that is not what I thought it was gonna be, you know. You know, so now at least 3D printing has taken away the shock and awe. You can print it ahead of time, turn it around, look at the angles, and say, yeah, that's right, before you get into molds. But it is a real kick in the family jewels when, you know, you make molds and obviously more than a few, and you realize you're not in love with what you just did. You want to tweak some. Yeah.
Big oops.
Yeah, we've had a few instances where I've rejected. You know, we've gotten to SEMA, and we've had a series of molds done. We were ready to go to mass production, and we open them up, and I'm like, nope, I won't make that. And then we sure as hell have to just, you know, swallow it down and move on, you know?
Yeah, totally.
Not the most fun. Where do you think the tuning aspect of some of these vehicles is going to go? I think
really hard to say.
I know because you know, the EPA thing could obviously be a shakeup. We obviously knew the ECU tuning was
it's actually much bigger than the EPA. So
Yeah.
what happened in Europe is regulation required Europe to encrypt ECUs. And the companies who make ECUs don't make a different ECU for Europe and North America and South. Like, the world gets one ECU.
Right.
And if Europe is requiring unbreakable ECU encryption, then the world gets unbreakable ECU encryption. So starting in like 2023, and then really with some gusto in 24 and now into 25, it just got way harder to tune. And realistically, like in the case of the Raptors, so I love the 2122s because the ECUs are open. We can get into them, no problem. If you got a 23, you're going to have to swap a 2122 ECU into your 23 so you can tune it.
Right.
If you got a 24, ECU swap is off the table. That's for an F-150. Now, for the case of Ranger Raptor, Bronco Raptor, whatever, you can actually swap a 2122 F-150 ECU into those to get them to be tuned. So there's all these like silly things. Hey, in the BMW side, right, these M3, M4, S58 guys, they're doing the SUV X3M ECUs because those actually have a flex fuel. Like, it's absolutely nuts. So the problem is going to be supply of old ECUs. And so for like right now, you can buy a Ford 2122 Raptor ECU, no problem, from Ford, $800. So I just bought one. I know I'm going to need it. And I'm praying that they don't make it impossible to get to, because
you're gonna have the new old stock in the back cabinet of all the ECUs that you need for all the.
Well, actually, Jeff, when we get off the phone here, we're gonna have to think about this. We maybe need to start buying up all the ECU stock and just hold on to them.
Just ferrying them all the way in the back room here.
Yeah, I'm telling you, man, it's going to be a wild west game. I feel like Mad Max is going to happen because at a certain point, guys are going to modify their cars. If you can't get into the ECU, then they're going to do some like piggyback thing that tricks the ECU to keep it happy, and you stuff some extra injectors in there. And then
we're going backwards.
We're going backwards.
Absolutely.
100% going backwards.
They're definitely not passing a mission. Like, it's going to be Mad Max all over again. So I think right now we are in a really difficult spot. administration, whatever you're saying, EPA, all this new lead, like who the heck knows what happens next,
Right.
Yeah.
Right
Yeah,
now
yeah.
we're in a weird place.
Yeah. No, totally understand. It's an interesting thought though. Like maybe we need to start. I mean, if I was smart and I would have started to hoard 2JZs and RBs back in the day, I'd be doing pretty well right now. I really could probably retire and just start to sell those things at a premium. So maybe the ECU thing is, you
The next
know,
venture.
ECU or us is gonna pop up, and
ECURS.
you know what I mean?
I've got a container full of RB stuff. If you want to sell it for me, man, I'll cut you in.
I would, yeah. I mean, I would, yeah. I mean, that's great because I would like to
I'm
buy
sorry.
it. Yeah.
It just started itching for some reason.
I
It's
know.
crazy.
Yeah. It's just turned into a marketplace podcast.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Yeah, right?
Real quick.
Uh,
So you were talking previously about the electronic wastegates, and we saw that you've been working on those quite a bit. What are some of the advantages and disadvantages? I mean, I'm an old school guy, obviously, just using boost reference wastegates and stuff like that. What was with the decision to change over and start developing those products?
It's accuracy. So in a traditional wastegate, you have a spring and a diaphragm, and if you want the wastegate open, you need a certain amount of pressure to overcome that spring to blast it open.
Yep.
Yep.
With an electronic wastegate, you say, I want you open. I want you closed.
Yep.
And it will do it. And so I feel like I've been tricking diaphragms and springs with solenoids and bleed valves for so many years.
Yeah.
It's so stupid.
Yep.
And it works. Now, here's the reality of it. A wastegate is actually wasting energy.
Mm-hmm.
And in the perfect world, you waste no energy. Every bit of energy that comes out of your engine should be used to drive that turbine, to drive that compressor, just to make more and more power. But the reality is we have knock limits, and you're going to blow your rods and your crank and whatever if you don't have a wastegate. So what I like to do in the best engineering sense is do no wastegating. So if I want that wastegate closed, I want it closed until I need it open. And so I feel like that's what an electronic wastegate was. It doesn't creep off the valve seat a little bit and lets them, it just stays shut, and that's really
Because it works on duty cycle, correct? It's just an on off. There's no, it just kind of ratchets
well,
open.
it works
shuts.
off position, commanded
Position.
position.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
So duty cycle is like a traditional, like it gives it a little bit of a boost, a little bit of bleed to like crack the valve,
Okay.
maybe a little off the seat and let that go. But yeah, so I really have come to appreciate OEM stuff in the last couple of years or 10 years, whatever. Since working with an OEM level, they think about things that we in the aftermarket don't really think about, right? Everybody wants quarter miles and how fast and what does it say on a draggy? And the OEs are thinking about time to torque. So when you stab that throttle, how long does it take to come up to a certain torque level and certain RPMs? And when you look at what they've done in terms of control system, to get rid of an electronic wastegate is a sin because we've done it. It just doesn't work that well. And I see a lot of guys who are drag racing doing it. If you are drag racing, you want your wastegate shut all the time. You want the biggest turbo you can have with no wastegate. And yeah, by all means. But for everything that's not drag racing, I grew up as a drag racer and I've defected away over time. I've cared less and less about drag racing.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, I don't think you're alone. I mean, that's why there's no racetracks.
Yeah, there's no more drag strips, right?
Yeah. So real quick, kind of doubling back to the the efficiency measure. Do you think that still leaves a lot on the table for the turbo efficiency? I mean, we've seen variable vane turbos. We've seen some of these other things that allow maybe trims and sizes and the effect of how you can spool and how it can pull through. You think there's still a lot of room there for improvement on the turbo side?
Yeah, aerodynamics is big, and the interaction with the housing is equally big.
Yeah.
The gap between a blade and the housing, typically it's about 7. The wheel actually wears the coating away to absolutely minimize the gap. So there's a lot of little things you can do to try and bump up efficiency. So shapes of turbine housing, shapes of turbine blades, the size of the housing in relation to a blade. So the size of the AR, right? If you go bigger on AR, you get more flow and you lose efficiency.
Right.
If you go smaller on AR, you gain efficiency, which means for every exhaust pulse, it makes it spin faster, but you lose flow. So it's all a compromise. And ultimately, the question that needs to be asked is, what are you doing? What are you trying to accomplish?
Right.
What's it for? And some of the customers that we'll speak with are like, well, I want an 800 horsepower turbo, but I'm only going to run it at 450. That doesn't make any sense because you're leaving like 1,000 RPM of power band that you're going to use every time you're in it.
Yeah.
You're just thrown on the table just so you can have this fantasy extra headroom. So really being realistic is big, and not trying to chase the latest dyno charts and whoever's going fast. But building it to what's true to you and how you're going to use it is probably one of the bigger eye-opening things, I think, as you get serious into the hobby.
Yeah, it's hard. The bigger is better thing has always shadowed the aftermarket. I think whether you look at carburetors back in the day, if you look at intake manifolds, if you start looking at, everything right up into cams, you know what I mean? People over cam cars all the time, and now you're not in the power band. Like you're not doing the right thing for what you're trying to do to properly kind of work. And that's there was another podcast that we had done, I forget what it was, but there was a clip out, because what the editor here, Max, tries to do is he tries to find the most awful clip outs of me so he can put them on social media so that I can get all the hate mail. And he's usually pretty successful. So what he does is he found a clip where we were talking about how the fact that, like, I had made a comment that you don't just, like, people that just take and bolt on parts, that doesn't make a car fast. And, being able to put the right parts on a car and actually properly tune it, it's not the same. Like, there's a lot of things that you can do with electronic tuning, right? With fuel injection tuning and all this different things. That's great. You can do all that. If you have the wrong premise and mechanical parts, you're handicapped, because you can't, you know what I mean? Like you put a turbo that's never going to spool up on your car. I mean, you could probably get it to spool faster through tuning and timing adjustments and different things, but you're never going to be, if you just put the right turbo on the car to begin with, you would have been way more ahead of the game. And it's the same thing with some of these components. And people really think that this ECU is this magical thing that can just override everything you do. And there is a configuration that has to happen. You have to make sure that the parts you're putting on the car work with synergistic ways. They have to work hand in hand. Like, that's why the guys, I still think about some of the guys that were the fastest. They were running the max that they could on the parts that they had on those cars. It was always, they were maxing it out. They didn't move up until they had done everything else. The weight was out of the car. They stripped everything out. Everything was done so that the parts that they had on the car were maxed out. There wasn't, like you said, there wasn't this headroom. They weren't trying to do that. When they got to the point where they needed more, they went more, but then everything went more. You know what I mean? So it's interesting to kind of watch these people think that the ECU is this magical, box of unicorns and rainbows that can just all of a sudden outdo all the mechanical stuff that happened in the car.
Yeah, and there's a lot of advantage though. Like modern ECU, you got VVT,
yes,
all sorts of anti-lag technologies, and people are running ethanol, which spools a turbo up quicker. So there is certainly something to be said. And at the same token, when someone buys a setup, if they find out it's wrong, it's really a tear up to like rip the whole kit or whatever turbo and put a different turbo in and then find out that that's not right. So people typically just run what they went with the first time, and that's it. And maybe the guy who had recommended it was a drag racer and they're a street drive. So there's a lot that goes into it. And I feel like in general, what it's kind of come down to is this comes back to this application specific thing, right? So we had like 12 different Evo kits, probably 14 different Honda K Series kits.
Right.
Now we've got one Honda K Series kit. It's this MHI turbo. It'll make 500, maybe 550 on ethanol. It'll last forever.
Right.
If you want more, there's a bunch of other guys who can give you that, right? And in the Evo, all these kits, we now have the TF06 MHI, awesome turbo. With the Raptors, we've got one turbo. Like, this is the turbo you're going to want, And so I feel like when you get to a certain point, you kind of get the formula right. And that's where the value of a company like Full Race comes in, because you can go to a company like us and be like, what do I need to do this right?
Yeah.
And, if it's a DSM or an old 240 guy where the car was only worth a couple $100, they weren't going to do it right. But those cars are really expensive now. And, people are taking the time to build stuff right. So I feel like the market has changed in that probably more people are going to thoughtfully proceed as opposed to just plunk down cash on some mystery turbo setup.
Yeah, well, I think the income levels of people owning these cars has also changed. Like, because now the nostalgic cars that I want are not going to be things like Novas and and Camaro SSs and stuff like that. To me, like I'm still looking for I want Supras and I want GTRs and I want all the nostalgic cars that I couldn't afford but I read about in the day, and that's kind of how the thing goes. But now you're getting a guy like me that's going to own that car, and I am prepared to spend the money on putting the right parts and the best parts and stuff like that, because it's part of the ownership of this platform. So you said something about the material costs on manifolds multiple times. Do you think that when you guys first came out with some of these manifolds, and then some of the competition started to come out with, there was a fine line of a few companies coming out with different manifolds that you think were quality, and then there became this other one that looked quality, but may or have not been, because I know how many cracking issues we would run into with certain things. And then you went full blown, like you can get them on eBay for $150. Like, is that the downfall for, does that push you to get out of building manifolds sooner, or did that really?
I
not have
visited
effect?
all the factories I could identify in Asia that made turbo manifolds. I got on a plane. I met some people in Taiwan, some people in China through the Turbo Network, the Garrett Turbo Network. I met them in France at a Garrett Turbo meeting. It was like 2016, 2017. I said, hey, I want to come visit you, and I need you to help me. I can speak like a little bit of Chinese. So I need you to help me around the country, and I want to visit these factories. And doing it in the U.S., we did it at a limited capacity. We started discontinuing. And the fact was, we paid our fabricators as well as you could pay the welders. Like we used top-notch materials. We're welding robotically. We're using argon. Then we're also welding with argon hydrogen on the robot. We're using some expensive blends. And I mean, then you're competing against, you're like you said, your competitor is a guy in his garage with a TIG welder.
Yeah.
And to Instagram, it looked the same. And from what we saw, we're like, wow, we are not differentiating ourselves. Our value is murky. And, some guy with a bandsaw TIG welder in his basement is with an Instagram, whatever, is now our competitor.
Yeah.
Is a threat. We're doing this wrong.
Yeah.
There's just no way around it. And so how do you do it right? And that was really kind of the beginning of the conversation. My team's phenomenal. I have an incredible team of fours. I'm extraordinarily grateful to have the team that I do have. And it was a tough, man. It was heartburn that day. We were like, yeah, I think it's time. We sat down. It was exactly 4 years ago now. We sat down for our annual in January, annual planning session. We said, what are we doing this year? And we came out of that meeting a little bit of our heads down, but we knew that it was time. It was time to stop making turbo manifolds.
That's
20 years.
That's a huge, I mean, it's hard because, like, I think as much as, when you start getting into business, you try to tell yourself, like, hey, like, don't get romantic about what we do. Like, just be really, like, enthused about playing the game. You know what I mean? But there is that romantic piece of what we do, the nostalgic piece that you always want to carry with you. And it's a little bit of a bummer when you have to say, well, it's time to really move on. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So it was a lot of fun. We had some great memories, made it on a lot of magazine covers and whatever. But, in the end, I'm really interested to see where things go next. And, right now, just putting it out there, right? You can't actually buy very many cool cars from Japan.
Right.
There's the Civic Type R.
Right.
There's the Supra, the Z. Like, nobody's buying these things. And the Supra is a German car anyway, right?
Yep.
You've got the Corolla, that's a 3-cylinder. So I mean, like, what is going on in Japan? Meanwhile, in the US, we're just pumping out millions and millions of twin turbo V6 all-wheel drive trucks that are just so much fun. And you can drive a truck as fast as you want, get as much trouble as you want in the dirt, and nobody cares. As soon as you're on the asphalt, like, you're getting locked up in the state of Arizona. You know what I mean? Like, it's a different deal. So for us, I feel like, so my whole team, we recently had a just like after school kind of after work party. After work party, and everybody took some of the trucks out to the desert, and we had like this, the whole team was out there. That everybody was like, "This is so much fun!"
Right?
You can't just pile into a couple cars and safely drift around the city. You're getting locked up.
After work go karting is like our equivalent these days.
It's the new after school special. But yeah, so like, I mean, I think, kind of circling around here before we close out, I think here's my question. It seems like with everything changing, with a lot of things going on, you coming from Civics back in the day, right? And now going kind of full-fledged into what you've seen over the past, few decades. What is there, would you say, well, maybe it's Ford, maybe we already tipped the hat, but like, is there one recipe that one manufacturer seems to have that really, Civic was popular because there was so much aftermarket support, but also because, like you said, everything became interchangeable. It also
It was
became,
Legos.
yeah,
Right? You could
it was,
mix and match, and
yeah, and it was cool as anything. Do
and
you think?
that's Ford. Ford's got it. I went
Okay.
down this path with everybody.
Yeah.
I was hoping it was Toyota. I was so stoked on the new Tundra motor.
Yeah.
And that turned out to be a turd. I was pumped on the new Tacoma. That thing's a turd. Right? I'm sorry if anyone's feeling getting hurt.
No, we're here to hurt feelings, Jeff.
I was ready to buy a new Tacoma when it came out. I saw it SEMA. I was like, we're going to do this.
Yeah.
And then we went and bought a Ranger Raptor, and I was thinking, hey, maybe we'll buy a Ram Hurricane, the new RHO. We went and bought a Gen 3 truck.
Yeah.
And it's like, I've gone down this path. And so like actually right now, so I have a Gen 2 Raptor. I'm converting it to Gen 3 Raptor.
Nice.
I am painstakingly taking every nut, bolt, washer and examining it closely. And what I found was that everybody who talked about these Gen 3s on YouTube and on these forums, no surprise, was wrong. They're like, it's basically the same truck. They just took off the leaf springs. It's basically the same truck. They just put a new screen in. No, they've changed and fixed everything that is wrong. Every like plastic timing chain guide in the Gen 2 that's going to explode, or the junk phasers in the Gen, they fixed all it. Metal timing chain guides, phasers that don't break, and little brackets that are made out of plastic and break on the older F-150s. They made them in metal, and just little things. And so when I look at this, I am actually so I lifted the cab off, lifted the bed off, and I took a Gen 3 frame and I swapped all my Gen 2 stuff over: fuel tank, evap canister, motor, tranny, it all plug and play. Wow. And that's wild that you can do that, right? That's straight out of the Honda playbook. You took the Integra this with the whatever Civic that, and you can do that with Fords. You can go get a 2015 Ford for like 10, 15K with a bunch of miles on it, lift the cab off, lift the bed off, go get some Raptor stuff, put it back down. You could put a 7.3 liter V8 or a 5 liter V8 or a 3. It's just whatever you want it to be.
I'm actually glad you brought up the 5 liter, because I'm a big fanboy of the Coyote, supercharged Coyote twin turbo F-150s, and obviously with the 10 speed. Pros and cons of that, anything that you've seen on your end that you like about it, don't like about it, just because you seem to have motor, a good feed
cylinder
on
heads are good, DI system's great, but the reality is it is so easy to make a 3.5 liter haul them out.
Yeah.
It's so just take the turbos off and you put new turbos on, move on with life, right? With a 5.0, that's a tear up. That's a big engine swap. You got wiring and coding and FDRS, and that's real work. It's doable. And there's certainly 2 more cylinders. There's just nothing to be said, or something to be said about the simplicity of you take the 2 stock turbos off, you put the full race kit on, and it's just done.
And now, can you do that with the Power Boost F-150s, where it's just like the regular F-150 out of the showroom that V6 twin turbo, or is this exclusively to like a Raptor package? Can you do that with the Power Boost?
Yeah, any 3.5 liter F-150.
Okay.
That's
awesome.
crazy.
So the key is that if it's a 2023, again, you'd have to use a 2122 ECU.
Okay.
If it's 24, we're off limits. We're not doing 24s. It just can't get into them right now.
All right.
So do the Ford EcoBoost cars kind of follow that suit a little bit? I mean, is there?
There are no Ford EcoBoost cars, right? There's Mustang.
Oh, but
they stopped Focus.
Oh, okay.
They're all dead.
Yeah, but what about the legacy ones? Is there still stuff there for people that are looking to tune things?
A little bit. There just wasn't much of that. There's the Focus ST, so that's an integrated 2-liter manifold. Well, not Ford's best work, not their worst, right? There's the Fiesta ST, which is a 1.6 liter. It's like, I had a Focus RS for a little while. Awesome car. That was every bit Evo and then some. So I loved that car. Probably shouldn't have sold it. But I really wish the Mustang had come with the 3.5 liter EcoBoost. That would have been a nice.
Yeah.
I just said I wish they would have done a 3.0 or 3.5 in that RTR one that they just debuted at the Detroit Auto Show. I think it would have made such a big difference.
Well,
yep.
RTR, that's a whole.
Well, it was,
I know what you
the
mean.
opportunity to do something unique like that would have been in that package.
You might hear something from Full Race and RTR at some point. You never know.
That'd be awesome.
Never know, right?
That'd be awesome.
It's all right, Jeff. We figured out what the thumbnail is going to be. It's going to be Jeff from Full Race says everything except for Ford sucks. So it should be pretty wild. Well, it's interesting. I think that some of these EcoBoosts, even out of the truck stuff, there may be a lot of opportunity for them to find themselves into some really other cool swaps into some other vehicles as we kind of venture down the road. So
Yeah, I saw Tucci put a Raptor engine in a Mercedes. I don't know if you saw that. The thing's an animal. That guy did beautiful work.
Yeah,
That
I've
thing's
seen him,
cool.
and I know that there's been a few instances. I know like Chelsea, if he built like an old Fox body and he put one in. I don't know exactly which gen or anything like that. So I can't really give too much authoritative stance on it. But it's interesting to kind of see that. All right, last question, because this is, I think, how do you feel that the Ford 3.5 engine reliability it is for making that power? Where's that point where you're like, hey, don't go north of this, or no, you got a few years and then got to tear it down?
So the answer is it depends. On a 21, 22, on the Gen 3, like they're awesome.
Right.
Like phenomenal. On a Gen 2, you have to put Gen 3 parts in it. Gen 3 timing parts.
I was gonna say that's the one with the phaser issues, because we used to have the older Explorer with the 3.5, and that thing, the phaser started screaming at like 85,000 miles.
So that would be a Gen 1
Okay.
truck. Those generally have a very long timing chain. And so the screaming sound is more often the timing chain is stretched and it's rattling around.
Okay.
It was the Gen 2 truck, the 17 to 20s, that got the phaser issues. And so what you do is you put a set of 21 up phasers and chain and guide, whatever. But there's so much confusion. Everybody who owns these trucks is freaking out on the internet. And the dealership is only putting Gen 2 stuff back in it because that's what the book says. And you're getting plastic stuff back
what
in
a
your
great solution.
Yeah, and I have made a thread. I actually have like the most viewed thread on Ford Raptor. I told people, this is what you need to do.
Right.
And it's insane how many people message me, hey, I brought your list to the dealership and they won't do it. I'm like, dude, I don't know what to tell you. I'm not selling you anything. I'm just telling you these are the parts that we use.
Right.
I do it. So, yeah, I think in general there's a lot of confusion. And I saw the other day, Ford CEO was saying how their warranty costs have been out of control. And I think this has a lot to do with it, right?
Yeah.
The phaser issue is a big one. But until people start waking up and say, you have to put the Gen 3 part in the Gen 2 engine and you will fix this, right? I would expect that will continue on. I've seen videos of guys who do this, who quit their job at a Ford Tech and just do phaser jobs. And they have just buckets of timing chains and like 5-gallon buckets full of phasers. And it's nuts, but makes sense,
It just doesn't make sense to me not to not go with the upgraded part at that point, because you upgraded the part because it was a failure point. So wouldn't that?
Well, you're an enthusiast, right? Enthusiasts care about these things. And like a normal person driving an F-150 is like, I want my truck and I want it now. What's taking so long,
Right. Yeah, it's crazy. So that's it. So we all have to sell everything we own and buy Fords.
I already got in on that one.
So this is probably like the moment you felt when you left the room and realized you weren't building Manifolds anymore. I have to now leave and go sell everything I own to buy Ford stuff.
Well, I am keeping one of my broken Nissans, my RB26 all-wheel drive swapped broken Nissan. I'm keeping that thing. I sold my Evo recently. I'm selling S14. I feel like I own like 4 F-150s, 2 are Raptors, 2 are... I have problems, so I'm just trying to...
I understand. I share these problems with you, and the only thing that's keeping me constrained is the fact that I live in New York and my garage isn't big.
Yeah, there's no room where you're at in Long Island.
There's no room. And honestly, if I figure out how to overcome that, there'll be more cars. There's no doubt about it. So I totally get your problem. I suffer with it.
Cool, man. Well, if you ever want to come down to New Jersey, there's a
100%.
Wharton. It's a big park near Six Flags Great Adventures.
Okay. Yeah, definitely. I appreciate that. And I appreciate you kind of peeling yourself away, kind of hanging out with us for a little bit and sharing some nostalgic and also maybe some tips for people that are tired of not making power.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. My pleasure. Those Koenig villains started this whole mess.
Damn, that's pretty dope. And one of my first set of wheels too was I actually had caffeines, but that's all the story. Anyhow, Geoff, thanks, man. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, guys.
Oh, thanks for coming on. Really, man. OG.